Geico. If you wanted fireworks, you got a sparkler that didn't light on Friday. The Boston Bruins, with a quiet deadline. Appearing on Felger and Maz this week, Michael Felger said to me, "What do you expect from the Bruins?" I said, "Not a whole lot." And boy, oh boy, did I undersell it. That was nothing. It was basically nothing. Bruins make 2 trades, one of which is a minor league move. Brett Harrison and Jackson Edward get traded to the Flyers organization. The Bruins get Massimo Rizzo and Alexis Gendron in return. And then right after the deadline, you get word of another trade for the Bruins. They acquire German forward Lukas Reichel in exchange for a 2026 6th-round pick. And that was it. That was it. Now, the Bruins aimed higher. They wanted to do something better, but the prices were not what they wanted. The prices were not what they wanted. I think the Boston Bruins wanted to make a big move. They did not want to sacrifice their future. They remain on the hunt for a big move. But as yesterday kind of proved around the league, yesterday and the deadline this year was not the time to do it because nobody really made a big move. And so here we are sitting here on Saturday morning. Ryan Garvin producing today. Hello, Ryan.
Hi, Ty.
We're sitting here. We're saying, okay, well, a little annoying, right? I think that the deadline comes and you don't really improve your NHL roster at all. But at the same time, I have to be honest here, and I have to say I'm happy the Bruins didn't trade a first-round pick for Justin Falk. I'm happy they didn't trade a first-round pick and a prospect and a player off their roster for Braden Shen. I can like the deadline players that were available. I didn't love any of them. And when teams put for sale signs on their front lawn and they say, hey, we're trading a defenseman if you want one, and you try to get one, and the price is too high, and guys won't waive their no trades, what do? Do you get in on it just to make a move, to say you made a move? Like, that's kind of a problem too, right? Like, you look at what they did a year ago, or not a year ago, but you look what they did 10 years ago, where Don Sweeney brings in John Michael Lyles and Lee Stempniak, and he trades 4 picks out the door, and you're kind of like, I don't love that, because I don't really think it made you all that much better. And then you look at what happened a year ago, where it's a massive sell-off. Like, there's a balance there, right? I do like Don Sweeney resisting the urge to get in just to get in. But if the prices are high, and they were high. It was never a buyer's market. There was that report during the week, and I was like, no, that's not true. It's not a buyer's market. It is a seller's market in a major way. If the prices are high, why don't you sell? That's what, if you're a Bruins fan and you're looking at things pragmatically, as Don Sweeney said, why didn't you sell? And I'm not, and I think people equate selling to what they did a year ago. No. I'm not saying that. I'm not saying trade McAvoy and trade Pasternak and trade Zadorov and trade Swayman. But you got pending UFAs on your team, one of which has been a healthy scratch for the last, I think, two of 4 games. Like, don't know if you're going to keep him. You have a logjam there. And so that's the question that I think you can have. Not why didn't they pay the prices for talent that probably doesn't elevate you all that much, but why didn't you take advantage of a bad market and sell off guys for good returns? I think that's the question that you can ask yourself today. And Don Sweeney basically said, like, this team has earned the right not to have that. Okay, sure, but you keep talking about the long-term vision. Long-term vision. To properly execute the long-term vision, you have to be a little heartless at times. You have to be a little, yeah, you know what? This team's good, but they're also 1 point from being out of the playoffs right now. You know, they got one fingertip hanging off the cliff right now. You know, like, it's, I like what they've done, but anybody who wasn't bolted down as a bona fide long-term part of your plans or a lock for next year's roster, I would have taken a call on. And I'm sure they took some calls on these guys, but did the emotion outweigh the vision? Like, that's what I have to wonder about with Don Sweeney and the deadline for the Boston Bruins.
It's It's an interesting way to look at it. I think historically this has been a franchise that holds on to guys much, much longer than they should. I don't know. I'm not going to quibble over it. I think that you brought up a point. I believe it was the midday show. Could have been the afternoon show. But I think you said it on the midday show that it's as if the Bruins did not expect this team to have performed. Like, obviously, we as fans can sit and have our expectations, whether you think they're a cup contender, whether you think they're going to stink. Like, I thought they were going to stink this year. Ultimately, nobody is going to know that team better than the front office. And I thought you outlined something interesting in the sense that I think the Bruins were surprised by their own success because I think they anticipated that they would be able to move, like a Pavel Zacha at the deadline, guys who they could get more capital for, and they've performed. I don't think that's Don Sweeney blowing smoke when he's saying, like, this group has earned the right to, see how far they can make it. They have not earned the right to take some of that draft capital and invest it in this group. I like this group. They've been fun. They've been competitive. They played more good hockey than bad hockey. And Marco Sturm is having a good first year as a first-year head coach. However, I don't think that this is a team that you need to go buck wild with and start moving draft picks around for. Like, the Justin Falk return, I think that was the one that stunned me the most for getting, was it a first and a second? He's got half of this season in 1 year, and he's done. He's in his 30s, and I know he has some playoff experience, but those were the kinds of moves I was worried about. And those are the kinds of moves that I think Don Sweeney would have been more apt to make a couple years ago when there was an obvious window with this former group before that teardown. Not selling, but that was a full-on identity teardown that they had to do. I liked their trade deadline. I don't know a damn thing about any of the guys that they brought back, but this is kind of what I hoped for. Let this team play out the season. Let's see what we have. I think they've answered some questions as far as who's going to be here in the long term, but I think that they still have some more work to do, and I think they positioned themselves in a good spot between the young talent that we hopefully get to see in the next year or so, excuse me, and having first-round draft picks that may or may not be burning holes in various pockets. We can get to that later. But I think that they have set themselves up for the future, which is something that they have had to do for a while now. So I like their trade deadline.
Yeah, I mean, I think I look at it from the standpoint of you sort of, if anyone who wasn't bolted down was something that I kind of looked at and said, okay, well, can you leverage this? Can you get somebody here? Can you bring somebody in? Andrew Peeke was that guy for me where you're seeing what guys are going for, and if you're scratching a guy, and he was a lineup fixture. For the first 57 games, whatever it was, he played 56 of 57 or 57 of 58, whatever it was. And then all of a sudden, a week before the deadline, he's scratched. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? Like, you feel like there's a trade that's going to happen there, and it doesn't happen. And again, at the end of the day, like, only time will tell if they're right? If they go through this and they end up re-signing Peeke and he's your third pairing right shot D, you're like, okay, that makes sense why you didn't trade him. However, if it's the other way around and you didn't trade him and the playoffs come and he's a scratch and then he goes elsewhere, you're like, well, probably should have traded him and gotten something for him, because even a second-round pick or a third-round pick is better than a guy walking away for nothing, right? And that's sort of the balancing act here for the Bruins and maximizing a retool. And again, I understand why you don't do it. On one hand, on the other hand, you gotta, sometimes you have to make the tough calls, right? And this is this was the worry that people had when they took this approach of, like, we're gonna go through a quick retool. It's like, okay, well, quick retools require you being absolutely brutal. You have to be ruthless. You have to be aggressive in terms of what you're willing to do, and it's gonna get uncomfortable, and you're gonna have to upset your room at times. I always go back to this. You think Alex Ovechkin loved the Capitals trading Dmitry Orlov when they were 4 points out of a playoff spot back in 2023? No, but they sold Ovi on what they were doing, and they said, this is going to help us. This is going to help us restock the pipeline with talent, with players, with young talent, whatever we need. And then sure enough, the Capitals next year were best team in the Eastern Conference, and I know they're back down to kind of being what they were, back in 2023 here. But like, if you can sell division, you can sell division. That's the big thing that I feel like for the Boston Bruins. Like, they still want to add a foundational piece, and that couldn't be done yesterday at a human price. But not selling limits the amount of assets you have to trade for that foundational piece, right? And so that's part of the balancing act here for Don Sweeney. 617-779-0985. We're going to take a quick break here. We come back, we're going to talk to Bob Beers about the deadline, about the week that has been for the Bruins, and what they have to do to get back to looking like the team that they were prior to the Olympic break here on 98.5 The Sports Hub.
Ty Anderson, Ryan Johnston, and Bob Beers. This is
looking to get back in the win column after a struggle of a game down in Nashville. Joining us now on the Expert Hotline is Bob Beers. Bob, what's going on?
Morning, Ty. How are we doing today?
Good. That little post-deadline, discussion today, just beginning right there. What did you think of the decision to stand pat and overall kind of a dud of a deadline throughout the league, it felt like, on Friday? A lot of talk, but not a lot of action, it felt like, in the league.
Yeah, just reading and hearing and listening and whatever. Some of the retention stuff that was added in this year probably had something to do with it. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but it might have changed a couple of, because you didn't see teams, eating as much salary, right? And I think Calgary ate some on Kadri's. There was a couple other ones maybe out there as well, but I think that from the Bruins standpoint, they were obviously looking, right? They were high in on Rasmus Anderson when he became available, whatever it was, a month or so ago, pre-Olympics, obviously, but. So it kind of gave you an idea what they were looking for, right? That right shot defenseman. Mm-hmm. There were several that moved. There were some good names that moved. I mean, John Carlson goes out to Anaheim, and Weegar goes to Utah, and the Anderson deal, and Falk ends up going to Detroit. So I think there were seven or eight overall that moved. Right shot defenseman. Connor Murphy went to Edmonton. How many guys are you really high on? How many guys are you, say that this guy can really bolster our team? That's another question. And then contract status. Does the guy have a contract? Well, we want to sign you to an extension, but okay. In Rasmus Anderson's case, the way that we were told, or the way that we heard, was that he decided he did not want to sign an extension, and that took us, took the Bruins out of the running a little bit, but. Weegar's contract situation. I mean, he's 32. He's got 7 more years on a deal. Yeah. I mean, that's steep. I mean, he might really help you right now, but I'm not sure what that looks like towards the end of it. So, I like the player, but you got to be a little smart there as well. So, I think that. I just heard you talking just before you went to commercial there, talking about Andrew Peeke and the possibility why they didn't, move him and try to get something back from. And I don't know this for sure, but I'm of the belief that if they got that right shot defenseman that can play the second pair, that there was a chance that you would move Peeke. Then I like Andrew Peeke in my lineup. I just want him slotted in the right spot.
Right.
But if you get that guy, and you've got a you got a 1-2 punch on that right side. Then maybe I'm just saying maybe that makes another trade possible for the Bruins where they move an unrestricted free agent to be out.
Yeah, I feel like reading between the lines of what Don Sweeney said on Monday and then yesterday, it was sort of like, yeah, to your point of you're not subtracting without knowing that you're adding at that spot.
Exactly.
It felt like, and I do wonder how. I don't want to say scarred. That's way too strong a term, but like it feels like they've had multiple playoff runs where they've really gone through bodies on the back end, and I do wonder if that's part of the calculus here for Don Sweeney, where like he realizes that D tend to go down, for whatever reason. With this team, it feels like they have that rash of injuries every year, and I do wonder if that played a factor as well, because he could get you something, but if you don't have the bona fide return, it puts your coaching staff and your whole team, in jeopardy in a 7-game series. It may have felt like.
Well, he referenced it last week. Don Sweeney did 11 games in 19 days. That's what they're in right now. I mean, that's not an easy schedule. And you got your back-to-backs. You get in the other night from Nashville late. And, yeah, they got tomorrow or had yesterday off. Excuse me, but then back-to-back afternoon games here. It doesn't let up, and it's true for everybody. And you're in a playoff spot. It makes it even more of a grind. You're not one of these teams that are way out in front. Every game is every day. It means a lot. You look at the standings, and it's moving day. It seems like every day. But 11 games in 19 days. You're probably going to run into a couple injuries on the back end. You've got 16 games in 28 days here in the month of March that we're in the middle of right now. So
insane.
Yeah. So that's. So if it's more, playoffs are every other day, and you see what happens. This is, this is a rough part of the. It's the way the season has gone for everybody. but you have to prepare for injuries, and I think all the teams are kind of on alert for that.
Do you think at all that this past week and the struggles that they've had out of the gate since the Olympic break may have played a factor in their willingness to pay some of these prices that we're talking about? You know, Justin Falk, as you mentioned, he goes for a first and a third. I mean, a first-round pick is, for this Bruins team right now, given the uncertainty of the picks and where they may lie, like that can be, you know, too high of a price. But do you think at all that this malaise, if you want to call it that, out of the break has hurt their decision making or made them think, okay, maybe we got to go a little bit slower than we thought here?
I don't think so. I think it's too small of a sample size, and it's too much of an unknown. You know, how teams are going to come out of the break. There's been teams that have struggled out of the break, and then teams like Buffalo just continue to win. But, you know, how many teams have done that around the league? I know Dallas had a little winning streak that was stopped last night, but, you know, but those, you know, Buffalo has turned themselves into one of the top teams in the East here, and so they're in a bit of a different position right now. They're fighting for first place in the Atlantic, not the second wild card spot. So teams are in a different spot. They're playing with a ton of confidence. First time in the playoffs in 13, 14 years for them. They're not there yet, but they should make it. Other teams that are in it all in, you know, the West, the Central and the West. I mean, between Dallas, Minnesota, and Colorado, I mean, did they load up? Yeah. You know, their team's in a completely different spot. So I think you're trying to figure out your team right now. I think you're trying to get them going. I don't think that the 4 games has had a lot to do with the trade deadline, so to speak. But at the same time, they know that they've got a lot of improvement they need if they're going to make the playoffs. The way that they played.
Yeah, and just moving off the deadline, or wrapping up the deadline, really, is there any team that you look at in the Eastern Conference around the Bruins that made some moves and you go, oh, that's a more formidable foe than they were this time a week ago?
Well, on paper, I guess, you know, Garland should help Columbus. You know, on paper, I think he's a good player. Maybe he's not having the best of years, but how many guys were in Vancouver this year?
Right.
But there's another one, right? His contract, he signed an extension with Vancouver. It hasn't even kicked in yet. It doesn't start till next year.
Right.
And I think it's a 6-year deal. So, you know, you got to be a little aware of that. You know, I think he would have helped this team this year, no question about it, with his energy and the way that he plays, the pace that he plays at, local kid and everything. So, but, you know, at the same time, are you willing to pay the price, and are you willing to have that contract, you know, the way it's structured here over the next 6-7 years? So whatever it was. But I mean, the Islanders maybe a little bit. I guess they're around. Schenn should help them. The emergence of Matthew Schaefer's just changed the whole complexion of the Islanders. Right, yeah. The way that kid plays, easy rookie of the year, I think. I don't know if there's anybody else contending the way that he's played, but he's changed the whole complexion for the Islanders. So, you know, they felt that adding Schenn would help them in that department, you know, some playoff experience. But, I mean, who else? I mean, you know, who are they fighting with? The Penguins? They really didn't make any moves, right?
Right.
You know, Washington sold. You know, been too fair. I mean, Dowd's a heart and soul player. They moved him as well as Carlson. Carlson was a shocker.
Yeah.
You know, who am I missing? I mean, who are they fighting with in the playoffs right now? You know, if they can. I mean, Detroit made a move for Falk. Okay.
Buffalo
Montreal really didn't do much.
And Stanley, and that's kind of
but they're at the top of the division.
Right.
You know what I mean? They're in a different spot. They're not. I mean, Bruins aren't fighting with them for the playoffs.
Right.
You know, they've kind of distanced themselves from them. So. You know, can they catch them? Sure, but it's probably a long shot if they keep playing the way that they're playing. But I mean, I like what Buffalo did. And as soon as they couldn't get Parayko, they made moves for the Winnipeg guys and even Carrick from the Rangers. So they added some grit to their lineup. So we'll see how they, you know, meld in with the way that Buffalo's playing right now. And you know, you got to be careful with your Sabres. You don't want to disrupt the locker room either. But by all accounts, all those guys are glue guys. So. It shouldn't be. It should help. It should help them on paper.
Right. It feels like when we've talked about Buffalo and the lack of taking that next step, when they weren't taking those next steps, we kind of came back to like the competitiveness, right? And those additions definitely bolster that competitiveness. with the Buffalo Sabres, who have been. I mean, I can't believe they've been as good as they've been. Like because they were looking early like they were going to be another version of the same Sabres that we've seen these last 10 years basically. But they've really turned it on. They've been a great team. Talking about this game that the Bruins had in Nashville, what stuck out to you as the biggest issue for why they weren't ready to go and why they ultimately lost that game by the final they did? I
mean, we kind of talked about it in the pregame show. It just kind of had this bad feel about it. I didn't like it. I asked Marco Sturm about it in our pregame show, just about, okay, you got the trade deadline. You got a team that's, in Nashville that's moving players. Ryan O'Reilly didn't play in that game. He was out with an upper body injury. We thought it was trade related, but it wasn't. So, the Bruins have to play a certain way in order to win. And it's not, they can't get away with just outskilling a team, if that makes any sense, unless your top guys are just going on a given night, right? And they're not a team that's built that way. They're a team that has to play, straight lines, get the puck behind the D, work the D, work the forecheck, have their special teams being on. Defensive structure. I mean, there was nothing in that game that you can point to and say, wow, they were really good in that department. They just didn't have it all night. And they tried to battle back a little bit. Cyrus had to make some good saves, but, the Bruins just weren't, I don't think that they were mentally sharp in that game. Sometimes it's physical where you just don't have it. Schedule catches up to you, and sometimes it's mental. And that game, to me, looked more mental than anything. So they've had 4 games. They've won 2. They've lost 2. They haven't looked their best. Opportunity tonight and tomorrow. You're catching a team tonight that just made a couple massive, or especially one massive trade. See what they, you don't want to come out and take them lightly. And then you got Pittsburgh tomorrow, potentially without Crosby. Crosby practiced, I know, but there's no Malkin. Malkin got suspended for 5 games.
Yeah, that was
so
wild.
You're going to face them tomorrow. Yeah, you're going to face them tomorrow. Potentially without both Malkin and Crosby. So do you look at that one easily and take it easily, lightly?
Right.
No. If you do that, you're going to lose. You can't outskill teams. You got to outwork them.
One of the big changes one of the things they dove in on during the Olympic break was fixing the PK. I know they gave a power play goal on Thursday in Nashville, but for the most part, it's worked to this point. What have you seen that's allowed the PK to get back to the standard that Marco wants to set for this team?
Sometimes just talking about it and hitting a reset, maybe making a couple minor tweaks, it kind of clicks again for you. I think the goaltending has been really good. I know Korpisalo allowed maybe not on a power play, but the shot from Haig, I think the first goal. Maybe you'd like to have that one back, but the goaltending has been good. Swayman was excellent in the game against. Was it Pittsburgh?
Yes, yeah.
And Pittsburgh was near or at the top of the league in power play. So you shut down a good team there. They haven't taken as many penalties. They did against Nashville. But the first couple of games, they didn't take as many penalties, but they have 7 times short in the first 3 games. So you're not overtaxing those guys as well. Mm-hmm. They're pressuring a little bit from out high, down low. When we talked to Marco Sturm about it one day, he referenced like a Kucherov who likes to get on the half wall, and instead of pressuring with the strong side D, you're pressuring with the forward that's coming down a little bit, trying to get the puck out of his hands. If teams try to go through that half wall guy as a setup guy, then you want to get the puck out of his hands quicker and force him to not have the puck as much. So that's something that they talked about as a minor tweak. But I just think that if you're not taxing those guys as much and you hit the reset button coming out of the Olympics, which nobody knew how any team was going to look or how any player was going to look. And there's certain players, for the Bruins that have to be better individually. But, as a team on the penalty kill, it's looked better. The power play hasn't looked as good,
right,
but the penalty killing has looked better.
You mentioned that there's some players that you want to get more out of. A player that I'm looking at, and I don't know if I'm looking at it because he's just so good, is David Pastrnak. I feel like David Pastrnak can take his game up a level. Do you feel the same?
No question.
Okay.
No question. I mean, we've seen how good, dynamic that Pastrnak can be. he puts a lot on his shoulders. The way he played last year, I know that teams maybe took the Bruins lightly because of the direction that they were going late, especially late last season, and David was able to put up a ton of points. But he's done it every year. I'm not sure what's going on, coming out of the break, but he's done some good things. He drew some penalties the other night. I know he took one, but he also drew some. Had a turnover that led to a goal. But I'm pretty confident it will come for him. He's just got to kind of play his way out of it a little bit right now. And, Geekie was snake-bitten coming out of the break, right? The chances he had against Philly, the chances he had against Pittsburgh, it was good to see him get on the board the other day. Bruins need those two guys. When I say that they can't outskill teams, when those two guys are going, maybe you can outskill a team if you're not at your best. But if they're not at their best, then, you've got to, you have no choice, but you've got to outwork that other team.
And wrapping things up, I know that the trade deadline, as we talked about, is come and gone here. Do you think that the mental part of that, it will be beneficial for the Boston Bruins, right? Where you don't know what you're doing, you hope that they don't strip away, and you hope that they add, but they end up really kind of giving you that vote of confidence. As a player, what do you think that can mean for this team that has really stressed how much better the locker room is this time, now versus a year ago?
I think it can help, but only the players can dictate that by their performance on the ice, right? It should be a little bit of a relief. Nobody was asking to be moved as far as we know, right? So, a player likes stability unless they ask to be traded because they're not getting the playing time or whatever the situation might be. But we haven't heard any of that. So, they've got to be a little bit relieved, but now they've got to go out and prove it. And right now they're in a playoff spot. They put themselves in a good spot. I think their goal at the beginning of the year was to fight for, to be in the playoffs and to be a competitive team. They've done that more often. They're in the playoffs right now, and they've been a competitive team more nights than not. So continue that, and we'll see where this thing goes.
One thing that I'm curious what you think about this is Don Sweeney said yesterday that two teams called about Morgan Geekie. What would that trade offer even have to be for the Bruins to entertain that, or is that just yeah, thanks for the call, but we'll talk to you later?
I think it was kind of exactly. I mean, unless, I don't think anybody's off the table if you get an unbelievable offer. We've seen some blockbuster deals in the past, but I don't. They just signed him to a contract. He's performing up to expectations. If you look at just the numbers, right, and what he's done this year offensively, I think that's right where they were hoping he would be. Is there areas of his game that can improve? Sure, but he's doing what he's paid to do and score goals and create offense. So, I'm sure teams made calls on a lot of players,
right?
And that's if you're not you're not doing your job. But I think it was a little bit tongue in cheek as well. But I didn't take it as seriously as maybe some other people did.
Yeah. I that always just makes me laugh though when teams call about guys that are clearly not going to be on the move. It's kind of like, all right, well, what's the offer? I don't even know what the offer would be for you to take that. If you're the Boston Bruins, that's what made me laugh about that, because he has been, to your point, such a find for them, right? That like it's really interesting. I think like how this deadline
it's a good story.
Yeah, and you can't blame him for trying to find the next one. If that was what they were aiming to do this deadline, I like that from a Boston standpoint of trying to find that next guy, and it didn't work out that way for them. I mean, we'll see. Do you remember anything about Lukas Reichel? Because I honestly don't, and I don't blame anyone if they don't, because he's played so sparingly in the NHL.
No, not a lot. I mean, saw him a few times here and there, but I honestly don't. The fact that he was a first-round pick says, the potential's there, but obviously that hasn't manifested yet, as an everyday NHL player. So still young, but that's the fact that he's going right to Providence, and we'll see if he can kind of resurrect his game down there.
Yeah, that's kind of, that was the big tell there, going right to the AHL, not even coming up here. It's kind of like, all right, well, we'll see him if we see him, right? I think it's interesting that he's a fellow German, like Marco Sturm. Maybe he can connect with him in a way that previous coaches haven't, but as we've seen, Bob, the Bruins have always been willing to take a chance on a first-round talent, right? And so maybe they think there's something to be there. I just remember him being a really fast skater. That's what I remember about. That's the only thing I really remember about.
That's kind of the scouting report on him, but I don't know much beyond that, to be honest with you.
No, same. All right, Bob. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know it's a busy day with that 12:30 start, so we look forward to hearing you on pregame beginning at noon, and then puck drop a little after 12:30, I would imagine, with this being an ABC game.
Oh yeah. I'm not sure the exact time. I know I have it somewhere in my emails, but I think it's before 12:45. Let's go that way.
Well, that's good. That's good. At least it's not till 1:00. You know, that's always the bummer there. So,
Yeah.
Bob, thank you so much for joining us, and I look forward to hearing from you next week as well.
All right, Ty. Thank you.
Awesome. That was Bob Beers joining us on the Expert Hotline here. We got loaded phone lines. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to go right to your phone lines here on the Shaw's and Star Market Hockey Show.
Stay tuned for more of the Shaw's and Star Market Hockey Show on the
Johnston joining us live from the broadcast booth in a little while in the 10 o'clock hour. But we're going right to your phone calls in order of weight here. Frank the Tank. Frank, what's going on?
What's up, bud? Look, this is rare for me. 2 years in a row where I'm actually praising Don Sweeney at the trade deadline. Look, I've really enjoyed watching this team. They seem like a hard-working group of guys, but if you're a Bruins fan, you're a hockey fan for them. They're not going to go deep in the playoffs, but if they make it a round or two, fine. I'm going to watch it. It's going to be great. Look, the whole thing with Peak, I think when they got him, they were kind of looking at him as maybe a Johnny Boychuk type of right-shooting defenseman, and it just hasn't panned out for him. Look, I like the fact that they didn't give up their assets, because I really think that at the draft, depending on where that Toronto pick lands, I think they can go into the draft with a lot of bank to be able to make that blockbuster move to maybe get a player or two for the team next year to really make that push to go deep into the playoffs.
Yeah, Frank, it's a great point. Thank you for the call, and I agree. I think I've said it. I've said it before, and I've reported it, and I firmly believe it to be the case that they do not want to use all four of those picks. They want to make a trade involving some of those picks. Now, Don Sweeney might disagree with me in terms of my reporting and how I've described it, but I do know that they want to move those picks. I said they're burning a hole in their pocket. Don Sweeney may view things differently, though.
Don, how much did...
Don, the first-round picks that you do have, some of the conditions obviously are still up in the air. When it came to adding potentially like another foundational piece or another core piece that could cost one of those picks, did the uncertainty of where those picks may transfer or where they may land give you any pause in terms of a move of that magnitude?
We've had a lot of discussions. You just don't know the forecast of where they are. There's some parameters associated with some of those picks, and where some of those teams currently sit and where it might finish. So yeah, we were definitely trying to forecast what those four picks might look like. Certainly knowing kind of our own situation. We didn't move them because they weren't exactly burning a hole in my pocket.
Oh.
That being said, we explored an awful lot of opportunities that if we felt, to your point of improving our team moving forward, adding to our group, it's areas that we would have done something if it really aligned for us.
The audio doesn't give it the credit, because he shoots me a smirk after burning a hole in my pocket. He knows. He listens.
Oh, you guys have fun.
We do have fun. I think it's a great back and forth. I love it, and I think he likes it deep down too. Nevertheless, they want to make an impact trade. Now, the problem is the teams they were talking to about making that impact trade are not negotiating on planet Earth right now. If you have let's say you have a young 26-year-old center, Ryan, who's had back-to-back 80-point seasons and is signed for the next 5 years, whatever it is, you are allowed to ask for the moon right now because you don't have to trade him right now.
Sure.
You're waiting for that hypothetical player who may or may not exist, perhaps in the Midwest somewhere. You are allowed to ask for the moon right now, but the Bruins still want to be in the discussion when those prices come back down to earth. And I'm talking about Robert Thomas. I think it's very obvious that they want to get him. They want to lure him out of St. Louis. I've heard it from multiple sources now that they love him and they love what he can bring to their team. But if St. Louis is saying we want 4 assets, maybe even 5, you're kind of like, talk to us in the summer when Robert Thomas says, I want out. I need to get out of here. Let's go in an order of weight here. Mike in Salem. Mike, what's up?
Hey, what's going on, guys? So it's probably going to sound like an echo chamber today, but I am pretty happy that the Bruins didn't do anything. What do you think of Hagens being their quote-unquote acquisition post-deadline? Because obviously once BC's season ends, they'll probably be calling him up.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Hang up and listen to your thoughts.
Yeah, no, he's totally on the way up here. Once BC's done, he's turning pro. They're burning the first year of the entry-level deal, and he's going to play in NHL games. Now, I like what he can bring to your team. It's kind of like Ryan Donato back in 2018 or Charlie McAvoy in 2017, right? Like, the player is showing is going to dictate where he plays in your lineup, but he should give you a boost on your in your middle six, somewhere thereabouts. And that's another reason why I was kind of surprised that there wasn't a trade made to maybe address that logjam, because it's the worst kept secret in Boston right now that he's turning pro once the season ends. And so you want to get him in there, and how do you make that happen? That's one reason why I was surprised that they didn't make a move off of that roster, or off of that spot. And along those lines, Jake in the suburbs has a thought on Eyssimont. What's going on, Jake?
Yeah. So I have a few points. Number one is the Eyssimont thing. I just think, especially after they signed Steves, it's kind of, now there's a little bit of redundancy there, and ultimately, if one of them goes down, it's not going to make or break your ability to make a run in the playoffs. So I'd rather see someone like Higgins or one of the guys from Providence step in. But two other points. Number one, just kind of a laugher. I don't know if you've seen Trent Frederick's stats, but he has 60 games, 3 goals, 1 assist, minus 17. Kind of funny. Good job by Sweeney last year. But then the final thing about the Bruins style of play, I think generally speaking, I actually haven't seen a lot of the physicality that I felt like I saw a lot earlier in the season. And there's one player, though, with all that being said, it kind of feels like one of these things is not like the other. And it's Elias Lindholm. Honestly, at this point, he looks disinterested. Pasternak looks like he's fighting something but trying. Hustadinov is, I love watching him play. Lindholm just feels just there. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Yeah, no, it's fair. I do think, Jake, that Lindholm is also battling through something right now. I think he's been bugged by a lower body injury pretty much all year. The skating does not look up to par with what he was before the injury. I do think he's battling through something. You kind of see it when he walks around. He doesn't look like he's operating at 100%. This is the problem, though, that if you don't nail your picks and if you don't have the assets to make the trade for the high-end center, well, you're going to be signing the proverbial high-end center when he's hitting 29, hitting 30, and the injuries creep into the game. And Lindholm he's had injuries now, both years in Boston. He's got whatever's going on right now, and he had the back injury a year ago that delayed his training camp and really delayed his start. And he didn't feel like himself until the second half, when he had a very productive second half. But with Lindholm, you're basically going to have to put him with David Pasternak to get the most out of his game, which, if you're paying almost $8 million for a guy who has to be a Pasternak, merchant, I don't know if I want to pay that guy $8 million, right? But this is what happens when you can't acquire those players. Steve and Sonam with a thought on the deadline. Steve, what's up?
Hi, Ty. Thanks for taking my call. I think if you take a look, I know it's a small sample, but if you look at the first 4 games after the Olympic schedule, the team looks like they've hit the wall. And if they didn't get the goaltender that they got in 2 of those 4 games, they could very easily be 0-4. So I think that's a concern. The defensive grouping, I know they don't want to trade first-round picks, but Buffalo didn't trade any first-round picks. They traded some players to second-round picks and got what might have been two serviceable defensemen in Stanley and then the other guy, Sean. I wish they did something like that, because the defensive grouping, Ty, I don't care how many guys they have, they aren't good enough. It looks like with the schedule being condensed, they're going to have to overplay McAvoy and Lindholm. And McAvoy looks like he almost gets injured every night. Something happens to him every night. So I think I really think he's fragile. And the more he plays, the more susceptible he is to injuries. So I wish they would have added there. And one other quick thing, I think if Garland got what he got, I think Arvidsson, they would have been smart trading Arvidsson. Because they probably would have got a pretty good package for him. He's 33 years old, but they're going to re-sign him, and I think they should have used him and moved him. So I agree with selling as well as buying. Thanks, Ty. Wait to hear your comments.
Absolutely, Steve. Thank you for the call, as always. Yeah, to your point, I think that they really wanted to add a defenseman. And I think if they were able to move Peak for the return that they found palatable, they would have added a defenseman. I thought it was telling that New Jersey basically said every defenseman besides Luke Hughes is available if you want to try to trade for him. I think Brett Pesce was also a guy they said they don't want to trade. But you look at New Jersey, they had a big 6'5" right shot defenseman, Jonathan Kovacevic. I think he was a target for the Bruins. I firmly believe that. And then Kovacevic comes out and he says, "I'm not waiving my no trade." It's his first year with a no trade. He has this year and next year with a full no move. And he basically said, "I'm not waiving. I like it here. I want to stay here." And so the player used his power to say, "I'm not waiving my no trade." I will tell you also that And I don't know if they were super in on him, but Colton Parayko also didn't want to waive his no movement clause.
I can't believe he didn't want to go to Buffalo.
Didn't want to go to Buffalo.
Crazy.
But so he weaponized his no trade. I don't know if the Bruins were interested, and I don't know if that was a I don't want to go to Buffalo thing or an I don't want to leave St. Louis thing. You know, some of these guys, they like where they are. You know, it's a real thing that, you know, I've talked to players who've had no trades in other cities, and they talk about how awkward it can be, right? When a team comes to you and says, hey, we want to trade you, and you're kind of like, well, my family's here, middle of a school year, I don't really want to leave. And I wondered, to Steve's point about Victor Arvidsson, I wonder if that was a factor. You know, Victor Arvidsson has a young family. You know, they went on a long road trip, and Victor Arvidsson did a pregame hit with NESN Sofia Jurkstovich at ice level in the final game of the road trip. And Sofia said, what are you looking forward to most about getting home? And Arvidsson was like, my family. Like, when he doesn't move, and when he has a full no move, and the market is the market, and Connor Garland goes for a second and a third, and you're kind of like, oh, damn, you can get something good for Arvidsson, a veteran third-line winger on a cup team. That'd be a great addition for somebody. It kind of makes you think, like, yeah, we're going to do right by this player, and we're not going to take him away from his family for 2 months or 3 months, whatever it may be. I just wonder if that played a factor here for Don Sweeney. Also, Arvidsson's been good. I wouldn't be surprised if they extend him. I don't love that, but also, is that better than giving a 30-year-old a 6-year contract? If you can keep this guy who's 33 for 2 years at $4 million per, like I would wonder there. All right, let's take a break here. We come back, more of your phone calls. Tom, Dave, I see you guys on the line. We just got to do a quick break, some headlines, then right back to your calls here on the Shaw's and Star Market Hockey Show.
The Shaw's and Star Market Hockey Show will continue with Ty Anderson.
sorts. Not really. It can always be worse. We're not working in the coal mines. Anyway, do we have Ryan? Do we have Ryan right now?
What's going on, Ty?
Oh, live from the broadcast booth, Ryan Johnston. Ryan, how we doing?
Doing well. Nice early morning here at TD Garden. Things are slow, quiet.
Yeah. What was that like? Oh, yesterday was the exact same. Slow and quiet for the Boston Bruins. Before we jump on and take some calls here, I did want to get your opinion on the deadline and the the moves and the non-moves, I guess, made by the Boston Bruins by 3 p.m.
Yeah, the non-moves is what tells the story more than the moves did, certainly. It was, when you heard Don Sweeney on Monday talk about, he led with it. Before I think he even had taken a question, he was talking about taking a much more conservative approach at this deadline. Certainly they did that. But my overall takeaway from yesterday with, some of the names that did not move that we expected would potentially be on the move. Obviously, Robert Thomas didn't, go anywhere. Trocheck didn't go anywhere. Names like that we kind of anticipated would get traded. I think that probably tells you a lot about the asking prices and where they were around the league, and that there were a lot of teams that are in a position to try to make a run at a Stanley Cup that decided to pass up on some of those asking prices because they felt like it just wasn't worth it. And, some years we see teams, paying outlandish prices, and you could probably make the case that a few of the deals that were made, the prices were, might be ultimately shown to be too high. But the Bruins didn't get sucked into that and decided that, they'd rather take a run with what they've already got.
Yeah, that was something that, I had reported and others had reported as well, that, the Bruins liked guys that are out there, but they were very aware of the prices, right? And that's sort of the name of the game. And I think if you're a Bruins fan right now and you're waking up on Saturday morning or looking at the news on Friday afternoon, it might bum you out a little bit, but I think if you're a Bruins fan, you should be happy that they didn't trade a first-round pick for Justin Falk, for example, right? Or a second and a third for Connor Garland, who, as Bob Beers noted earlier, his extension hasn't even kicked in yet, which will take him up to his age 36 season as a 5'8" winger. And I love him as a player, but the prices, it just goes to show you, the prices were just so out of whack. And, I think you have to appreciate the patient, long-term view to a certain extent that Don Sweeney has taken with this deadline and with this team right now.
Yeah, that's just kind of, what the trade deadline has ultimately become. If you are a team that, believes that you really have a shot of winning a Stanley Cup, this year, then maybe you throw caution to the wind a little bit. And if you're not, then maybe you sit back and, and kind of, decide to make smaller moves or maybe even do nothing. The Garland move is interesting in that it comes, he comes to Columbus. Who's not exactly knocking on the door of a Stanley Cup, right? They're a point behind you in the standings right now and are just trying to make the playoffs. And so, that certainly is a move that can help you potentially make the playoffs this year, but it's a long-term move. And as you said, for a guy who, has a 6x6 contract that kicks in next year, that's going to take him until he's 36 years old. That's a big commitment to make. So not only, is it a commitment to make with what you have to give up to get a player like that, but you've also got to be willing to, to eat that contract. And if it doesn't go well, you're going to be hearing about it from your fans for a long time. So, there is a balancing act there. But, given where the Bruins are, I think, it does make some sense that they didn't swing one of those, swing for the fences kind of a moves yesterday, because that's not where this team is right now. They're hoping to get into the playoffs, and we're hoping, and we're scheduled to have an interview with Don Sweeney, an exclusive today. He's going to be joining us here in the booth before the game. We'll record it. We'll run it back during our intermissions this afternoon, and so we'll get a chance to ask him a little bit more about that. I know we heard from him yesterday afternoon as well about kind of what the market was dictating and where he feels like this organization is, and what the next steps will be after this season is over.
Were you surprised that they didn't buy, but they also didn't sell. Were you surprised by them not moving anybody off their roster?
Not really. Again, I think Peak and Arvidsson, as the unrestricted free agents, would be the players that you would look at there. I think both of them have value to this team down the stretch, and I think I heard Beersy say it in the first hour that had they made a move to bring in a right shot defenseman, then maybe that makes Peak a little bit more movable. But if you take him off your roster now without adding another right shot defenseman, where are you? That's going to hurt you down the stretch. And Don Sweeney has made it clear that he feels like this team, should get a chance to make a run at a playoff spot. I would certainly, agree with that. And and so taking one of those guys off of this roster without replacing them would harm that. And I heard you say, sometimes you have to be a little ruthless, and sometimes you have to maybe be a little heartless when you make deals at this time. Listen, I don't know what the return would have been for either of those players. Are you getting a first-round pick for either one of them? Because if not, how much are you really setting yourself up for the future by dealing either one of them right now? So it's it's maybe going to be easy if one or both of them ends up leaving in free agency at the end of this year. Maybe it'll be easy to second guess, depending on how the Bruins do down the stretch, whether they make the playoffs or not, whether they advance in the playoffs or not, whether it was worth keeping them around. But for right now, I think he showed he was serious about letting this team play itself out and see what they can do.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for me, I'm not dumping these guys to dump these guys. If I were to sell them, it would be, if I'm trading Peak, I'm getting a second-round pick and a prospect, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm trading Arvidsson, which he has a full no move, so a good chance he didn't want to leave, right? And that totally makes it a moot point. But if it's Peak, it's a second-round pick that I'm either using to continue to fortify my future, or I'm using it in a hockey trade, or a trade, to bring in some win now kind of help, right? And so that's where I'm still in, and this is a me thing, I admit. I'm still in that asset collection mode, because I do think you need them to make trades. We've kind of cited the Washington Capitals as the model for what they're trying to do, where you take a step back a year ago, but then you're right back to competing. Well, the Capitals did a great job of compiling picks that they then used to add a Logan Thompson or a Pierre-Luc Dubois, right? And I know the Capitals are kind of back to selling now, but there's an asset accumulation sort of methodology there that I think the Bruins could have done with Andrew Peak. But yeah, to your point, if the offers weren't there, then I'm not doing it just to do it, right? And we don't know what the offers were, and we're probably never going to find out because they don't like to tell us these things. But that's the key aspect that I think I want people to know is I'm not saying dump these guys to dump these guys. I'm saying it's a good market. Yeah, and there's also, Sweeney said yesterday that they have at least reached out to both of those guys about potential extensions. So, it could be a situation where maybe you were willing to move one or both of them if the right deal was on the table, but you may also want to keep one or two of them around for the future. We certainly know how much Marco Sturm likes Victor Arvidsson. Guy loves him. Absolutely. They've got a past history together when they were in L.A. He has been a part of that Zacha line. They've put Zacha and Middlestat together, and basically that's been a set it and forget it kind of line for Marco Sturm for most of this season. And so it's not out of the realm of possibility that one or both of those guys is back beyond this year. Yeah, no, it's true. And if they're interested in Garland, right, who's going to be 30 years old in a month and has a 6-year contract, as we noted, well, you can probably get a cheaper version of that and not have to commit 6 years to it with Victor Arvidsson, right? Similar build, similar style of play, similar kind of heart and soul, gritty, get to the front of the net, bang away kind of personality. And so I do think Arvidsson getting an extension is completely realistic. Now, the only problem is that you already have 12 forwards signed for next year, and you have to account for James Hagen's likely turning pro in a couple of weeks. And so that's like the logjam part of it that might be a little bit tough for the Boston Bruins. Ryan, let's take a quick break and then go right to the phone calls here because we got a lot to get to between now and 11 a.m., if that sounds good with you.
Sounds good.
All right, let's do it. Another break and then right to your phone calls here, 98.5 The Sports Hub.
Ty Anderson, Ryan Johnston, and Bob Beers. This is
779-098-5. Going in order of weight here, and I thank you guys so much for being so patient today. Obviously a crazy day, a lot of phone calls, a lot of phone lines jammed up. So Dave in New Mexico. Dave, what's up?
Hey, good morning, guys. Thanks for taking my call. Ty, I was wondering if you could help explain the draft picks, the conditional draft picks. All right, say Toronto tanks, or they get lucky and get the lottery pick or whatever. Then where did the Bruins pick? And then I even got more confused when I went back and looked at the Marchand conditional, and Philadelphia somehow involved. Is there any way you could explain that a little, just the scenarios?
Yeah.
Thanks. I appreciate it. You guys are the experts, and you are the best show on 98.5. Thanks a lot for my call.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the kind words, Dave. Yeah, let's try to explain this as best we can, Ryan, because it is a little convoluted. Okay, so the Toronto pick is top 5 protected. Now, Toronto also traded a 2027 pick in a deal with Philadelphia a year ago. Now, if this pick does not convey this year, if the pick is top 5 this year for Toronto, the pick will get pushed back to next year. Now, my understanding on this, and I would have to double check this off the top of my head, I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me right now, is that they would basically have the option of either sending it to Philly or sending it to 2028. If they send it to 2028, it is completely unprotected. So it would be like it would be, if it's first overall, it's first overall. Like you're not protected at all. But basically, and here's where things get interesting, Ryan, is that Ottawa forfeited their 2026 first round pick. So if Ottawa, let's say there's a doomsday here, where Ottawa's in the top 5 and Toronto's pick lands at number 6, that pick would still convey to Boston. Even though it would be the 5th overall pick, technically speaking, it would be 6th and it would still convey to Boston. So there are some weird, sort of mechanisms here, but basically you want that pick to fall between 6 and 10 if you're the Boston Bruins. I think that's just where you want it to fall. That's the easiest way I can explain the Toronto pick.
Yeah, we're going to be rooting against ping pong balls once again here. This time, we've rooted for ping pong balls in the past. We're going to be rooting against ping pong balls because there are those, and my partner may be one of them, who is thinking that the system may not necessarily be on the up and up, and the league is going to want Toronto to get that pick in the top 5 if at all possible.
Yeah, so this is according to Puckpedia. The conditions on the 2026 round 1 pick for Toronto. It is top 5 protected. It slides to 2027 if it is in the top 5. The 2027 pick, however, goes to Philadelphia as part of the Scott Laughton trade if it is outside of the top 10, which converts this pick in Boston to a 2028 unprotected first round pick. So, however, if the pick slides to 2027, it is in the top 10. Toronto can either transfer it to Boston to satisfy the Carlo trade and then give Philadelphia a 2028 unprotected, or transfer it to Philadelphia and then give Boston the 2028 unprotected first-round pick. What a nightmare. What a headache that is.
How did I saw a video yesterday of one of the guys in the league office who was conducting a trade call, and it was a fairly simple trade call. Mm-hmm. As he's he's asking, I think it was the Schenn deal to the Islanders, and he was going back and forth with they have to go over each of the contracts, right? Yeah. Make sure that the teams, like he announces, this guy's got X number of years left at this annual value. He gets paid this for this year and this for next year, and he's going through all of this. And then he asks each general manager, is there anything the other team needs to know about this contract? And they said, no, it's a straight up contract. I don't who's in charge of keeping up, keeping track of all of this stuff. It's unbelievable, and that's just the one.
Yeah.
that's just the Toronto pick. They've essentially dealt the same pick away multiple times, and now it's a question of who gets it and when.
I will say, I think from the Bruins standpoint, I believe Evan Gold is in charge of all that. I want to say it's Evan Gold, who's like a whiz. He's like their cap whiz. Brilliant guy when it comes to managing a salary cap and managing money. You saw that during the record-breaking year where they were like managing the cap every day, and it was like, this guy's an absolute genius.
So just to getting back to the caller, so you need Toronto to not be in the top 5 this year, and so you can just get get the pick and make the selection or do whatever you're going to do with the pick and move on. If it ends up, that they're in the top 5, then you've got a first-round pick sometime in the next 2 years coming your way, but you don't know exactly when. It'll be dependent on how good Toronto is.
Yeah, and you can play around with Tankathon if you want. Toronto right now, most times if you run their little simulator, they're between 9 and 10. Sometimes they get up into the top 5, but that'd be the perfect scenario, I think, for the Boston Bruins, with that pick being around 8, 9, 10. You'd be positioned to get a great defenseman, whether that is Daxon Rudolph or Ryan Lynn, or I would love it if Albert Smith slid down. He was playing for Latvia in the Olympics. I feel like his Olympic showing has moved him up the board in a major way. But you should be able to get a good defenseman so long as that pick does convey this year, which you would want. The Florida pick, by the way, top 10 protected. The pick that they traded in the Seth Jones trade is top 10 protected, which nobody thought would be a thing. And then Florida's been really bad this year. Right. So now you have to watch that pick. But that one, there's less confusion there than with the Toronto pick that is going to the Bruins.
So essentially, if Florida's picking in the top 10 next year, they have to give that pick to Chicago. Is that or vice versa?
So if that happens, Florida keeps the pick this year. If it's in the top 10, and then everything would just slide up a year, basically. So that 2027 first-round pick they got for Brad Marchand would then move to 2028, I believe, is how that would break down. So that's the simplest way that I can explain that right now.
It's not very simple.
No, it is not. No, they don't believe in the simple in the NHL, unfortunately. Another man who's been very patient, I appreciate it, to the ends of the earth here is Tom in Boston. Tom, what's going on?
Hey, guys. Good morning. Ty, firstly, real quick, congratulations on not throttling Mike Felger and Tony Maserati on Thursday or whatever it was. If they ask to trade Jeremy Swayman one more time or try to get Brady Tkachuk for peanuts, I think it'll be the last time I listen to the show. So good job on that, not firing a pencil at them or something. Number 2, real quick. Earlier, somebody called and asked about Elias Lindholm. You said he's dealing with something again. I guess we can expect that going forward. So my question is, given that he's supposed to be your number 1 center, and given that he is bad and getting worse, shouldn't Robert Thomas be a higher priority? Shouldn't you be willing to give up? I mean, I know the prices were crazy, and it sounds like it's an off-season move, but I think I'm willing to give a little bit more than other people around here for Robert Thomas, a point-per-game player. I think he's 7th overall in primary assists in the last 4 or 5 years, right behind Pasternak. Mm-hmm. Dean Letourneau is at best going to be that. I know he's a freak or whatever, but I'm cool with a couple of firsts and Dean Letourneau and maybe more to get a guy like that playing next to, setting up Morgan Geekie for the next 6 years. Thanks for taking my call, guys.
Absolutely, Tom. Yeah, Ryan, I think that there are answers within the answers, right, with Don Sweeney on Friday. I think they clearly want to get a player like Robert Thomas, and I feel like they just need to have a bit more certainty of where these picks are before they trade the ones that they're going to trade. I stand by what I said. They want to trade some of these picks for a high impact player. It's just they got to know where they are, right? Kind of touching off what we just talked about, you got to know where the pick is before you trade it, right? Just to feel a little bit more comfortable in terms of what you're paying to bring in that kind of player.
Yeah, and I tend to believe, fans and a lot of the people in the media tend to just kind of fall in love with the idea of a first-round pick. I mean, number one, as you said, you don't know where exactly in the first round these picks are going to fall. You don't know who's going to be available at that point. You don't know if you're going to get it right or not. There's a lot of variables that come into any draft pick, and especially the higher end picks, as to whether you're going to get them right, whether those guys are going to develop into the player. I mean, you got to remember you're drafting 18-year-old kids generally, so what's that guy going to be when he's in his mid-20s and starting to hit his prime? You can certainly take a guess, and some guys are easier to guess than others, but there's a lot of ifs that come with any of those, and so I'm not shy about teams trading away a first-round pick for an established player if it feels like it's going to help your team over the long term. That's part of the reason you have those picks, is to be able to use them in some regard. That said, when you start talking about using multiple first-round picks for a player, and then throwing in potential other assets, including guys that you already spent first-round picks, it starts to get a little ridiculous. There's only, Robert Thomas is a really good player. there's only so much that one player can do. And so, that's where you start to look at some of these prices and say, teams are throwing, 2 and 3 picks in, and some of the reports on the asking price on Thomas were multiple first-round assets, elite prospects. So, okay, are you willing to give up Letourneau? Maybe. Are you willing to give up Higgins? Probably not, right? So if St. Louis says, well, the price is one of your first-rounders for this year, plus Higgins, plus this, plus this, plus this, I mean, how much can you do for that one player? That's where it starts to get a little ridiculous.
Yeah, and I think that, an example, too, that is worth noting here is, how does the board break when you're drafting, right? The Islanders were downright, forgive me, they were horny for James Higgins a year ago. They wanted him so badly. Long Island kid. It would be the absolute steal. They're not going to say no to Matthew Schaefer because Matthew Schaefer, as we've seen, is just unbelievable, right? But they really wanted James Higgins. They were calling the Bruins relentlessly, saying, "Hey, we got 16 and 17 overall. We'll give you those plus what you want. We just want number 6 or number 7 because we want James Higgins." They're in touch with the Bruins the whole way. And then the board breaks the Bruins' way, and they see James Higgins is there at 7, and they like James Higgins, right? Now, they liked Koloreshi, who went a few picks after those Islander picks to, I believe, Calgary it was, and they said, well, if we trade this pick, we can get something now, and we can get a guy that we like in the middle of the first round. But they liked Higgins more, right? So it all comes back to how a board breaks, and I feel like that's how the Bruins are kind of looking at these first-round picks that they may or may not trade. It's, okay, where does it land, and can we get the player we want? If we can't get the player we want, then it's of more value to us to trade that and bring in a known commodity. It's just right now, when you don't know where and when these picks are going to be landing, it's a little bit difficult to trade them. I think a Toronto pick is a great example. If you trade your own pick, let's just say, to bring in Robert Thomas, and then that Toronto pick is top 5, you're kind of like, oh man, now we don't have a first-round pick this year. That kind of sucks because we like the defenseman in this draft.
Right.
And so I feel like that's where they might be right now as a franchise. And so they just want to know what it looks like right now. You're dealing with a cloudy kind of picture. You're hoping that in the summer it's a little bit easier to forecast. And Robert Thomas maybe says to St. Louis, hey, I want out and I want to go to Boston. Make it happen. That's another part of this that I don't think we talk about enough is that guys know where they want to go now, and they say to their GMs, I want to go here, send me here. And I think Don Sweeney has made some passing mentions his last few press conferences about players maybe dictating their way to the Boston Bruins, and that maybe having to happen for them to bring in a star player if they're not going to draft a star player.
Just to your point, too, about, kind of seeing how the draft breaks. I don't remember which deal it was, but I was looking at one of the trades that was made here in the last couple of days that included a conditional first-round pick. And the condition basically allows for the team who owns the pick, who has now traded the pick away, to decide as their pick comes on the clock whether they want to give it away this year or next year.
I think is that the Carlson trade? I want to say it might be the Carlson trade.
It might be.
Yeah.
Like I said, I've kind of looked at a number of these, and I don't remember which one it was, but that was the selection. It's literally when the team in front of that pick uses their pick, it's that point that they have to tell the other team, we're going to give you this pick or we're going to keep it for ourselves. I mean, it literally comes down to a last minute decision for both of those teams.
That's ridiculous. I don't like that. There's got to be a risk involved in the trade. I don't like that. That's your own fault. Imagine if the Kessel trade was like that, where it's like Toronto is like, well, we like Tyler Seguin, so no, we're going to keep that pick. No, there's got to be some level of risk here involved in these trades.
I think you're right. I think it is the Carlson deal, because if Anaheim misses the playoffs, they have the option to hold on to the pick for this year and give Washington their first rounder next year instead. So it will be, literally determined at the draft. When they see who's left on the board, they can either just flip it to Washington and say, okay, we're done, your pick, or they can keep it for themselves and tell Washington, you got to wait another year.
Sick of these cowardly GMs, Ryan. I don't like it. 617.
Well, but that's part of the game, right? I mean,
it is.
If you saw some of the comments from Brad Treliving up in Toronto yesterday, he was asked about why is the Carlo the pick they gave up to the Bruins for Carlo, why is it top 5 protected instead of top 10? He said, well, we pushed to try to make it top 10. The Bruins obviously pushed back and said, nope, top 5 is all we're willing to give you.
You know what? That trade might be the thing that sparked the shifting of the narrative with Don Sweeney. I think people are starting to let go of 2015 to a certain degree, and they're starting to realize that he might not be as bad as we've said for the last 10 years. I think that might be the point where things started to kind of move around here. But I don't know. Nevertheless, 617-779-0985. Got some open lines for you if you'd like. We're going to take a break and then more of your phone calls here on the Shaw's and Star Market Hockey Show.
Stay tuned for more of the Shaw's and Star Market Hockey Show on the Sports Hub.
our full line of hybrid and electric vehicles today. Morgan Geekie, a new career high in goals with 34 goals on the year for the Boston Bruins, continuing to be a hell of a find for Don Sweeney and building off what was a great year a year ago. Morgan Geekie, Ryan, just been an absolute steal. Best way to describe it, just an absolute steal for the Boston Bruins.
Absolutely. Good guy, hard worker. You think back over his early part of his career, tough to believe that this is a guy who really couldn't find himself a home. That Seattle, didn't seem to have a place for him because he's a terrific player. Obviously, playing alongside Pasternak as much as he did last year, and has at times this year certainly helps. But what a terrific shot, and he showcased it again on that power play goal the other night.
If he scores 34 goals, I'll eat my hat.
So with that in mind, Ryan,
get out the fork and knife, fella.
I was going to say, with that in mind, Ryan, you fancy yourself a bit of a chef, bit of a.
Are we talking a baseball cap? Do we go like a fedora? What kind of hat are we getting into here?
How do you
Trilby?
I mean, Geekies from Manitoba is like they're kind of like an old west kind of a place. Do we go like a cowboy hat?
Do we smoke it? Do we season it? What? You tell me, Ryan. You're the barbecue man here.
I don't know. I'd have to look up any recipes for chapeau a la king or something like that. Don't know.
Well, here's the thing. We can all go to the Natick Mall. We can go to that hot sauce store. We'll find the perfect sauce for it. We'll smoke it. We'll brine it. We got to do whatever we got to do. We'll do it. We'll make it happen for Mike because he has hit 34 goals this year for the Boston Bruins, and that is just. I mean, it's not shocking because he did it a year ago, but there hasn't been the come down, right? He had that quiet month, but then he's right back to just absolutely firing it on goal. And it's a shot that I just don't know how you stop if you're a goalie. He's got such power behind it. And the way the release is just fantastic, I feel like.
Listen, Pasta said, before the season, he thinks that Geekie's got a 50-goal season in him. Certainly Pasta would know. He's done it himself, and he's been a big part of Geekie's success here, playing alongside him. But as we sit here right now, 34 goals, and the Bruins still have 21 games to go. That's about a 45 or 46 goal pace. And we know that Geekie can certainly get red hot as he was before. I think the last couple of games he had come up empty, but he's got 9 goals in his last dozen games coming in here today. So he might be sniffing, mid 40s or maybe even a little bit more than that if he can stay hot here down the stretch. 50's not out of the realm of possibility, whether it's this year or sometime in the future.
Yeah, I feel like he's going to hit it. I just feel like the shot is too good. The way they lean on him, especially if it's close and late, they put him with Pasternak. He's out there for empty net goals. Assuming health, it should happen for him this year. Obviously, that's a big caveat. You got to be healthy to do it. But I feel like, he's the kind of guy that can and should do it, and he should be put in spots to do it. I think, again, reference to power play. The power play, if they can get back online here and producing the way it was producing before the break, that'll help him out in a major way as well. How do you look at the power play right now, Ryan, and where it's kind of maybe, cooled off a bit? What do you think they got to do to get that going again?
Yeah, sometimes it's just a matter of kind of playing their way out of it. That top power play unit, we've seen it at times as good as they've been all season long, and they're still, I think, top 5 in the league coming into the day. They got that goal the other night, but it's right off the face-off, right? It's a quick win of the face-off, get it over to Geekie for the one-timer, and the puck's in the back of the net. That's a great way to obviously to help get things going power play wise. But it's just been back at the very beginning of the season, it felt like going back into last season. There were times where it just they talk about being connected, right, and being able to make quick decisions and keep the puck moving quickly, knowing what you're going to do with the puck before it's on your stick. And I think over the course of the 4 games we've had now since the break, it just quite hasn't been there, right? The passes are a little off. Guys aren't, you don't see that same crisp movement. Decision making, trying to get into the zone is maybe a little bit off. So I think it's just a matter of kind of getting back to what they do well here, and getting that group of five connected. I don't think it was it was a coincidence the other night that fairly early on in one of the power plays later on in that game, Marco Sturm brought the second unit out there because they've looked a little better, honestly, when they've had the chance than the first unit has. So, hopefully they'll be able to find it here. And, they're coming up against a Washington team that went 0 for 2 on the penalty kill the other night against Utah in their last game out. Obviously, they're, missing a little bit on the back end after the trade deadline. So we'll see if the Bruins can take advantage of that.
Justin and Lynn has a thought on the deadline. Justin, what's going on?
Hey, Ty, I just got a question for you guys. And why is Andrew Peeke still here? Why didn't they move him? Because he's been on the ninth floor the last 2 games. And is he a part of the future plans? Because I can't understand why they didn't move him yesterday.
Thank you, Justin, for the call. Yeah, I mean, that's the big thing, right? Like if with Andrew Peeke, if he goes back to the press box as a scratch, right, and he gets outplayed by a Yoki Haru or a Harris or Aspero, whatever they decide to do, right, when they're fully healthy and they have their full deck on the back end, if Andrew Peeke is a healthy scratch again, that's when the second guessing, I think, should become real for fans who said, why didn't you sell off this guy if he's going to be scratched and ultimately not re-signed? That's when that will come about, I think, for the Bruins, Ryan.
Yeah, there's something to be said too, Ty, for listen, again, the Don Sweeney has said it multiple times this week about giving this team a chance to compete for a playoff spot, and he feels like they've deserved that. Andrew Peeke has certainly been part of that. Honestly, the 2 healthy scratches coming out of the break were a little head scratching to me. We in fact questioned the first game back, which was against Columbus, I believe, when he wasn't in the lineup. We asked the PR folks here about is there an injury, is there trade, and they just said no, he's just not in the lineup. So okay, we'll kind of take their word for it on that. But we kind of thought maybe there was something cooking there. We hear teams talk about roster management decisions at this time of year, and so maybe it was something along those lines. Maybe they're trying to capitalize on Yoki Haru coming back from the Olympics and see if he can get going here. But first couple of games, they decided that Peeke is the better option there. So I don't put too much stock in those healthy scratches. Yes, if for some reason Andrew Peeke isn't playing regularly over the last month and a half of the season, I'd be pretty surprised. But if that were the case, then certainly there would be reason to second guess why he would still be here. Mm-hmm. But I think he's an important part of this team, and you're not exactly stacked on the right side defensively. If you traded him away, I think you're making your team worse for the stretch run. So I think there's something to be said for almost looking at him like a self-rental, that even if you're not going to, to keep him around after this season is over, and we don't know that for sure, but even if he ends up going somewhere else in free agency, would the return have been enough to weaken your team defensively when that needs to be a strength of your team down the stretch? I'm not sure that would have been the right thing to do if you're trying to get into the playoffs.
617-779-0985. We're going to take one final break, and then the final segment of this week's post-deadline hockey show here on 98.5 The Sports Hub.
The Shaw's and Star Market Hockey Show will continue with Ty Anderson, Ryan Johnston, and Bob Beers on the Sports Hub.
Hey, spring can be a trick.
Anderson here live in the Town Fair Tire Studios. Ryan Johnston live from the TD Garden broadcast booth. So the deadline is what it is, Ryan. They did not add anything to the NHL roster. This is the team. They did not subtract from it either, so this is the team. What do they have to do between now and Game 82 to separate themselves from Columbus, who added, and to secure themselves a playoff berth? What do you think is the biggest thing that this team has to do between now and then to stay where they are and be a playoff team?
I mean, the biggest thing, I think, is, really just kind of show up and play their game night in and night out. Over the course of 61 games now, we're 3/4 of the way through the season. Generally the Bruins have been exactly what management said they wanted them to be this year, which is a tough out, right? This is not a team that I think most teams around the league are going to enjoy playing against night in, night out. But there have been some games along the way, and certainly I think the game against Nashville the other night qualifies, where it just hasn't been there. And you can't afford to have many of those games here over the last 21. Columbus, since they made the coaching change and Rick Bowness took over, has found themselves and is making a push. And, they've gotten themselves now knocking on the door just a point back. Beyond that, Washington, well, we saw, kind of what direction it looks like their organization has them taking here down the stretch with the moves that they made. But, they're 4 points back coming in here, even though Boston has 2 games in hand. Ottawa's still creeping around there. They're 4 points back now. They've only got 1 regulation loss in their last 10. So you've got some teams that are going to push you here a little bit, but you have the capability. The other thing that they've got to figure out, and this is something that Sweeney has mentioned a number of times this week, they've got to figure out the road part of this as well.
Yeah,
they have been so good this year here on home ice, and that's great. But you can't be sub 500 on the road as they are, and expect that you're going to make you're going to be able to make the playoffs. The teams that are chasing you, Columbus, Ottawa that I just mentioned, they're plus 500 on the road. Every team that's in the playoff structure right now is over 500 on the road, and in most cases they're 5 or better games above 500 on the road. So being 3 games below 500 is not going to cut it, because the majority of your games are away from TD Garden so far. So that's something that they're going to have to figure out quickly.
Yeah, to piggyback off that, I would say also their physicality. They have found ways to flip games with their physicality. Mm-hmm. You saw the fourth line kind of try to do that on Thursday night in Nashville. They took a few too many penalties trying to do it, but that's been such a key of their team when they've been rolling, is the way that they can really wear teams down by that third period. So they got to get back to doing that. They also got to tighten up defensively, in my opinion. I just feel like right now the defense has just been a little too just loosey-goosey right now. The goaltending has really bailed them out in a big way, I feel like, since the Christmas break. Korpisalo's been playing great. Swayman's been playing great. They've had some duds in there, but overall the goaltending is doing their job. I just feel like you need to get that tight defensive structure back. And this comes back to what we said. The basis of this team is the physicality and the goaltending and the defense. So that's got to be there, I think, down the stretch, and that's their biggest. That's what can separate them between them and their competition, is because they do have advantages, I think, in those realms. And so those are things to be watching between now and Game 82 here for the Boston Bruins. Ryan, thank you so much for finding the time to join us from the booth. I know I know these days are pretty hectic with the 12:30 puck drops. We appreciate it.
No problem. Talk to you next Saturday.
Awesome. Bruins Capitals today, 12:30 p.m., 12 o'clock pregame, live here on 95 The Sports Hub. Alex Barth and Chris Gasper up next here. A special Celtics hour talking about Tatum and what is ahead for the Celtics, who all of a sudden might be a legit championship contender here. I am Ty Anderson. I'll talk to you guys next week.
From the Town Fair Tire Studios, Dutcher and Hardy, Owen Beetle, Felger and Maz, the Bruins, the Celtics, the Pats, the Revolution. This is Boston's home for sports. WBC-FM at HD Boston, 98.5 The Sports Hub, a Beasley Media Group station. Sports Hub headlines, presented by Celsius Energy Drinks.